So I thought it would be so cool if I did like a July wrap-up wrap, but who am I kidding? I'm not Lin-Manuel Miranda, so that's not happening. So I've covered the birds with a towel in hopes of deceiving them that it is nighttime, but I don't know if you can hear that, but I don't think it's working very well. So I'm sorry, but I hope you'll just put up with them again for the time being until I can find a better way of convincing them to hush it up. I don't know about you guys, but I'm having a very hard time believing that it is actually August. But it was also super nice, like looking back over July and everything I read and everything I watched and just, you know, everything that I consumed that I really enjoyed, and seeing how much I was able to do in the month of July, but also, you know, just how much fun I had with a lot of different forms of media. So for this July wrap up, I'm going to be doing books, anime, and Camp NaNoWriMo, and we'll probably just go straight through in that order. I'm going to be doing speed round reviews where I give you 3 pros and 3 cons of every type of media that I consumed, just to keep it pretty quick. But that's also how I just naturally do reviews when I'm just writing stuff down in my journal for myself. So it's not like you're missing out on any of my thoughts or like content, even if it is very condensed. So hopefully that means we'll be able to get to this video pretty quickly, because there is a lot here. I mean, I guess there's really not a lot here, just like with the amount of information I'm also giving to it, it feels like there's a lot, but it's really not. I'm not one of those people who have their July wrap up with, ooh, I read 30 books in the month of July. That's not me. I hope that makes you feel somewhat at ease. For the book section of this wrap up, over the month of July, I read a total of 1,788 pages over the span of 6 books. I'm going to start by giving you the ranking that I gave the book from 1 to 5 stars, and it's not going to be the ranking that I gave the book on Goodreads, because Goodreads you can't do like half stars or anything, or like sometimes I do like quarter stars, so I'm just going to tell you straight up like what I personally rank the book as, and then so it's not going to have any sort of affiliation with like Goodreads ranking, and then I'll go into the pros and cons. I'm also going to be going backwards in terms of what I read, so I'm going to start with the last book that I finished, and then we're going to work towards the front of July, if that makes sense. So the last book that I read in the month of July was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. That was definitely one I read during the reading rush, though I didn't finish it in the reading rush. The pros that I gave this book was that it had amazing prose. Arden has a startlingly unique imagery that's, you know, very evocative and very moving. I also gave it that she didn't waste any words. There were no words wasted. Every scene felt well structured and purposeful, and I mean the book as a whole felt very well structured, and you definitely moved through the story at a very consistent and progressive pace, which was really nice. You know, you never feel like, ooh, we're just kind of having some filler content. Everything felt very needed. Another pro was that she definitely left back doors for future development and future stories. It's typical with debuts to like not write a debut expecting that it's going to be a series, because a lot of editors won't pick it up if they see, oh, it's a series from a new startup artist. They're like, that might be a little sketch, or at least that's what I've heard. So she did a very good job of having it being a very solid, you know, all-in-one kind of story, but also leaving avenues for the second and third book, which are now out actually, of course, which helps it feel like the whole series was very well thought out and very naturally connected. But also, if she didn't get the opportunity to write the sequel and the final in the trilogy, the first one, The Bear and the Nightingale, still would have felt like a very good standalone novel. And the last pro that I gave it was that she did a great job of depicting Russian culture. It was very detailed, it was very evocative, and I really felt like I had a good understanding of Russia in this time period after I finished reading the book. A con for the book was definitely towards the end, nearing the resolution and the climax. The problem was resolved in a very Deus Ex Machina kind of way, kind of just like, ooh, poof, magical, oh, didn't tell you about this, and then everything just gets solved. And especially with the tension that Arden had been very steadily building from the beginning of the book towards this great fight with the bear, I felt it all got wrapped up a little too quickly, and I didn't really feel satisfied. And a second con for the book, and this is gonna sound kind of weird, but to me it felt very anti-Christianity. Now don't get me wrong, because the time period and the way the church actually functioned in Russia culture, there is a lot of critiques of the church that are very valid, and I do stand behind most of them, in that, you know, it wasn't a good way for the church to act, and there was definitely an abuse of power in probably a lot of circumstances. But even apart from that, it still felt, I don't know, still felt kind of weird. There's definitely a difference between critiquing the church in a certain era and just like straight up bashing it. But I don't know if that's me being touchy or if there is some validity to that. There was definitely an exception with the monks and with Sasha, one of the main protagonist's brothers, who wanted to become a monk in the story. So those characters definitely had a different vibe, but on the whole, I don't know, it felt very, very actively against. I don't know, throwing that out there. And that is not to say it is a bad book in any stretch of the imagination. I still gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in July was Where the Crawdad Sings by Delia Owens, and I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This book has a lot of prose, so I'm just gonna like shoot through them because really this was one of my favorite books that I read in July, and I could go on a whole tangent. The pros are definitely gonna be spoiler free, but the cons are gonna have spoilers, so I will let you know if you want to like skip ahead a couple seconds to avoid that. So stay tuned. For the pros, this book was definitely enticing, even though it was a slow burn, which is strange. I'm not usually like a huge slow burn kind of person, but this novel was definitely a slow burn. It's a murder mystery told in 2 different timelines, or I guess not timelines, like one is current time, one is in the past. So in that aspect, you know, they're both building to the point where they cross and become one timeline. But even though it was a slow burn, I always felt like it was still enticing, it was still engaging, there was always something happening, so I was never really bored. The story as a whole is just, it's so wholesome and it's so sweet. The characters are amazing, and the prose is very poetic, especially since the book is centered on the marsh as its location. It both introduced me to what it is like to live in a marshland, and also seeing the marsh through these characters' perspectives. I felt like I really fell in love with the marsh. I don't know if you guys have read All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater, but that book had a very similar effect to me with the desert and Pete Wyatt, and as he fell in love with the desert, I kind of fell in love with the desert. This one is almost exactly like that, except for marshland, which is really interesting because, you know, you get to see all these landscapes that you might not get to see in real life and kind of experience what they are and live vicariously through this story. So quality in that aspect. It was a very grounded story. It felt very atmospheric. Everything felt very real. It had great suspense. The whole structure of the story was very clever with the 2 different timelines and how that was playing out. As someone who is an aspiring writer, I know how difficult it must have been to like write those different stories in such a way that the future timeline isn't giving anything about the past before, you know, the past timeline can cover it. So I definitely have mad respect for Delia Owens for being able to be that kind of narratively agile while she's telling this story. But also, like, as a reader, it was super annoying because on the one hand, you know where the story is going to go, but on the other hand, you're like, I don't know how it does that, and I just want to get to that section and not have to jump back and forth between these timelines. But, you know, that wasn't a con. That's definitely like an element of enjoyment. Another pro is that Delia Owens did a really good job of keeping it an even 50-50 with the murder mystery that's happening. There are a lot of suspects for the murder, and honestly, she did a good job of not tilting it any particular way so that you never actually know like who could have done it. It could be even playing field for everyone. Everyone is fair game. And then this is another writer trick that I really admired, is Delia Owens is really good at lying by omission. Sometimes, especially in writing, I forget that that's a thing that we can do. We can just like not tell the reader things. It doesn't all have to be like plot twists. It could just be like, ooh, haha, but not like in a stupid, like out of left field kind of way. She was very good at like getting very, very, very close to the lie and just like not saying it. So I really admire that, and I'm hoping that's definitely something I can try and integrate into my own writing because I think that was a super cool trick. Okay, For the cons, these are definitely spoilers, so if you haven't read the book, skip ahead like 30 or so seconds, because I'm gonna try and like go through them really fast, so it shouldn't be that much time. The first con that I had was I was kind of unsatisfied with the fact that Kya, I think that's how you say her name, I'm not really sure, was actually the killer. And I'm not saying that because I didn't want her to be the killer, I just feel like the way it was kind of tacked on at the end felt kind of unnecessary. I feel like the book could have been just as successful if we never found out who the killer was and it just kind of be this mystery around the town, or if we did find out but maybe in a different way. I'm not sure. Maybe I really don't know what to suggest, but there was something that I felt very unsatisfying about finding out at the end, like, oh, she was actually the killer. I don't know. Let me know if you feel the same or if you get what I'm trying to say, because it just wasn't. The second con that I had was that Kya as Alexander Hamilton, or Alexandria Hamilton, I can't remember what the poet's name was, but Kya as doubling as the poet that she often recited in the book, that final revelation felt very last minute to me and very forced, and it didn't really seem crucial except to reveal that Kya was actually the killer. It really wouldn't have been important in any other aspect except to point that she's actually the killer. So I don't know, those are very closely intertwined. Like if we didn't find out that she was the killer, then that revelation that she's also the poet wouldn't have been needed, but I don't know, maybe that's just a me thing. I'm not against her having been the one to kill him. I actually think that's really cool. I just don't know if the reader needed to know that, and if throwing it at the end kind of untied the very neat closing that Delia Owens had done up until that point. The next book that I read was The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, and I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. Chef's kiss. Pros for this book was that C.S. Lewis does so much research and does all the legwork for establishing and developing his theory of the natural law, which is one of the foundational pillars that he uses to build his argument in Mere Christianity. So having that appendix at the end with all these different cultures and religions and how they all fit into what he has defined as the Tao or the natural law is super interesting, because there's so much research there and I got it basically for nothing. He did all the work and I just get to benefit from it. The second pro is that he's very distinctive between what theories actually matter and what theories are just for like fun theological navel gazing. Something that I definitely think is a problem in the church nowadays is that too many people take the nitpicking things, like little nitpicks between the different denominations of church and all these other sort of things, and make it like the end all be all. Like if we don't agree on all these things, well then there's something foundationally wrong with you, when really they've kind of inversed the whole pyramid of it, especially with C.S. Lewis's books and how he can get like so philosophical and theological and all this kind of like ooh smarticle navel gazing sort of stuff. He's very clear about at the end bringing it back and saying this stuff is cool to talk about, it's cool to think about, but at the end of the day this doesn't matter, this does. This is just, you know, fun, passing time, having conversation at the end of the day over a nice cup of tea, which I really appreciate because, you know, you definitely don't want to lead anyone astray and have them thinking, or like taking things too seriously than they really should be, which I greatly valued. Another pro, this was a pro I put for like every C.S. Lewis book, but he's so intelligent and he's so clear when he's speaking that really helps you get all these very abstract concepts and notions that he's talking about. It really helps you understand. And the last pro that I had is that the sass in this book is off the charts. Off the charts. Love it. I would give this 10 out of 10 if I could. I mean, technically I can, but you know, that's not the point. Cons for this book is, I mean, like I was saying, he's very intelligent, but some theories do still go over my head. They're very, very complex and abstract, and the book is very much intended for peers in his scientifical / theology / philosophical field, which I most definitely am not. I'm definitely an amateur just reading what he writes because I feel like it does have a lot of wisdom in it, but I'm definitely not on his level in any way. So there's a lot of stuff that goes over my head. Another con, and this isn't really a con, these are all still kind of like compliments in their own way, But another one is that C.S. Lewis, because this is definitely his field of interest, he's so well read and he's always referencing all these other textbooks and novels and essays and very old, archaic resources and essays and stuff that I didn't even know were like publicly accessible to still find and read. Like, I thought they would have all decayed, which is very ignorant of me, like, just saying that. But you know what I mean? Like, I didn't realize, like, he is reciting stuff from, like, but the Babylonian law code, and I'm like, we have that? But anyway, he's so well read. It's a little bit intimidating, but, like, in a good way. And the last con, though, I definitely feel like this applies to me specifically as a Christian, and not necessarily to everyone who would read this book, is I definitely feel like I have to memorize everything in it. So it's kind of a stressful read because, you know, it has a lot to do with, you know, why do you believe what you believe and those sort of things. So I feel like when I'm reading it, I really need to be internalizing it to be a good Christian. I need to know these in case someone asks me off the street so I can answer these questions. And so it just becomes like I'm trying to shovel all the information and just internalize it, which, you know, I can't do on one read because it's very abstract and intelligent and blah, blah, blah. But that's just a me problem. That's not really a book problem, which is why, honestly, the book still got 5 out of 5 stars because it's amazing. I'm a mess. That's the basic wrap up. The next book that I read during the month of July was Heroine, I think I'm saying that right, by Mindy McGinnis, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. The pros for this book, I mean, this book is definitely about a young girl and her struggle with heroin. I keep mixing up heroin and heroin, which is definitely the point, but also, like, hard to do the words. Definitely about a struggle of a young girl and her addiction to heroin. But either way, it's a great depiction of the reality of drug addiction, which I really admired. But even apart from the realism of it, I mean, Mindy McGinnis does a really good job of writing great sentences that feel very emotional without being too flowery, which also helps tell the story of, like, it's very real, but also this is still fiction, so we still want to have, like, somewhat of a good time, but also, you know, we don't want to, like, over romanticize the reality of this either. So she balances that really well. The other pro that I have for that is that just this topic is so relevant and so important for, I mean, now more than any generation, honestly, because, you know, the character in this is a high school senior and she has drug addiction, and I'm sure, like, that's probably a story a lot of people in public schools or, like, in high schools or anywhere can relate to, because drugs are definitely being introduced into our culture at younger and younger ages. So the fact that this is a young adult novel and kids can read it and learn about it is very important, and I feel like it will and can probably save someone's life or at least impact them in a very positive way. So I think it's very important that Mindy McGinnis have written that book and that it be out there as a lighter resource for children to educate themselves about drug addiction. The cons for this book is that it's definitely kind of a hard read. She has a prologue at the beginning of the book that shows the character at some point towards the end of the book, so you kind of know all along for that first 3/4 or so the kind of depravity the character is going to fall into, so you kind of read with that sense of dread and anticipation, which makes it almost a very painful read because you don't want that to happen to the character. And as you read, you fall in love with her and you're like, no, please make good decisions, you know, please take care of yourself, please love your family and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, you know, she won't, which is why it makes it very hard to read. Her character, this might be like kind of a spoiler, but because of the drug addiction, and I guess this is part of the realistic depiction of it, her character completely corrupts, which is fascinating and awful to see how much, like, the heroin kind of takes over her life and changes who she is just because of the addiction to it. Which is why, for me anyway, it was a very apprehensive, very slow read. I could only read it in so many doses because it's also kind of emotional in a way. So things to consider before reading it. Another one of the books that I read during the month of July was Mere Christianity, also by C.S. Lewis, which I also gave a 5 out of 5 stars. The pros and cons, honestly, for this book were very similar to The Abolition of Man. It is so wise, it's so relevant, so down to earth, so familiar between you and him. One of the things that I really admire C.S. Lewis's writing for is that he does a really good job of using great universal metaphors what I mean by universal is that they will kind of span across time and across different cultures because they're based off, you know, universal tenets of humanity, such as like he'll use hunger when he's talking about like impulses, or he'll use like sexual desire and relate them to, you know, theological concepts. And they're universal because, you know, everyone's been hungry, and most people, not everyone, have felt some sort of like sexual desire or physical attraction, which they can relate to these other concepts that you're talking about, but which are a lot more abstract and hard to kind of grasp in a meaningful way. But at the same time that he's good at using universal metaphors, he's also really good at addressing current events, such as the war that was going on at the time and, you know, his role in it and all those other things. So those are also like really good examples of, you know, just being socially aware. But even without the social awareness and everything, the man can write a knockout sentence. He can pull it out. You know, he kind of has it as like a secret weapon in his back pocket because so much of his language is very clear so that everyone can understand it. But like, he can pull out some beautiful language in a second and it'll like slap you upside the face. You'd be like, where did that come from? So his brain, that's where it came from. It's a scary, amazing place up there, I'm sure. The last book I read during the month of July, or I guess I should say the first book I read during the month of July, since we've definitely reversed this order, would be Threads of Suspicion by D. Henderson. I definitely talked about this in my last video, but this one I gave a 3.2 out of 5 stars. Even despite the low star rank, there are definitely some pros about this book. One of the pros would be it has a really good realistic depiction of the cold case detective lifestyle, which is very interesting to learn about. I feel very educated on what they go through now. It also had some very non-cheesy relationship advice. I have a very love-hate relationship with Christian fiction. Honestly, largely it's just a hate relationship with Christian fiction because they're so stereotypical. They're all the same. They're like Hallmark movies, just books. And they don't entertain me. They don't enlighten me, really. I don't feel like I've had a good time or learned anything when I've read them, so I typically stay away from them. But this one had some really good advice in it about relationships, because that's what all Christian books are about. So that's the point to it in my book. And the final pro was that D. Henderson, just like Catherine Arden, had no indulgent scenes. You know, every scene is carrying its weight, if not double duty. So I really admired that, and I'm trying to like learn from that in my own writing, how to make every scene do double duty. So that was really good to read about. The cons, of course, is that it reads a lot like a screenplay. There's almost no prose and no exposition except for like basic staging, like, ooh, they walked into this place, this is what it looks like, yada yada yada, and then everything else is just entirely dialogue as they interrogate people or they pitch ideas back and forth among them two or whatever. So it doesn't read like a novel. I didn't enjoy it like I would enjoy a novel. So that might just be something to keep in mind if you like screenplays, or if you like super like novels, or if you're not afraid of like a hybrid of them or some sort, then that's definitely keep in mind if you're looking at this book. And then the last con was that it was dry a lot of the time. I mean, about 80% of it was just facts and theories about the detective lifestyle, which, you know, it's like fun to think about and ponder about, but just like, it's not a good sit down and binge book because it's just a lot of the same, and it's a lot of very, very dry, very like mind-numbing, watching paint dry kind of narrative. Maybe that's just me, but it doesn't really feel like there's any character and there's not really any story to it. It's just very, this is what it is, this is what happened, this is what we think, oh that's wrong, this is what new facts, this is what we think, let's try this, oh that's wrong too, until the end of the book. My favorites of the book that I read in July would be The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis and Where the Crawdad Sings by Delia Owens. They're very different books to very different objectives, so it felt very hard or like unjust to try and compare these two against each other and try to pick one which I like more because they're doing very different things. The Abolition of Man, again, was like super insightful. I felt like I learned a lot, and I'll definitely be revisiting it. But as like a fiction or narrative book, Where the Crawdad Sings was also very affecting, very impacting, and just I felt so engaged in all of the characters, and I miss them kind of, so I know I'll be thinking about Where the Crawdads Sings a lot going forward, and I might even like pick up some elements and reread it, so it's definitely a top tier book. For the anime section of this video, I'm just going to be telling you any sort of like anime related content that I consumed or participated in the month of July. The first anime that I kind of watched during the month of July was Kakushikoto, which is a story about a man who writes less than savory comic manga to make a living, but he also has a little daughter. And so he goes, it's a comedy anime, and about like the extravagant extents he will go to keep her from finding out what her dad does for a living, because he's very ashamed of it. So it's kind of a slice of life in that manner, because every day is a new challenge, a new story, and it's really funny and amusing to watch. My pros for this anime was that it is definitely wholesome. They have a beautiful father-daughter relationship that is depicted in the story, which is really inspiring, and just goes to show you, apart from like the humorous aspects of it, just how much the dad will do just to make sure that his daughter is well looked after and very happy, which is, it's so wholesome to watch. It's also funny, which seems like such a redundant thing to say for a comedy anime, but you know, there are a lot of like gag anime that I personally don't really find funny, which are definitely like, some people are like split sides laughing at them, and I'm just like, this isn't funny. So I definitely found this one funny. And my final pro for it was that the writers definitely knew where the story was going, even from episode 1. There's a very subtle arc that starts in the first episode and continues into the last one, and glimpses of it are in every single episode. So I really liked that the writers knew exactly where it was going. It's not gonna suffer like some fates that animes have, where they're cut short and it feels awkward and it's ended abruptly. Like, they planned out the whole thing and they carried through the whole way, which I really enjoyed. Some cons for the anime was that same arc that I was telling you about earlier that started from the beginning to the end, the final reveal was fine, but the solution to the final reveal kept kind of rushed. If you've seen it, you will know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I don't think that's really spoiling anything. The story as a whole could feel very slow sometimes, which is, I feel like, a common symptom of slice of life, especially if like you're not feeling a certain episode or a certain series of episodes, then sometimes it can feel kind of plodding. And since it is slice of life, it's not like there's like a timeline or a deadline for things to happen in, so it is able to have that kind of lackadaisical, very slow pacing feel to it. So that wasn't really a bad thing, but you know, I feel like that's just something to warn you. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying in the pros, that this one I actually found kind of funny. I feel like in some aspects it does suffer the curse of a lot of like gag comedy shows, in that, you know, some episodes are funnier than others. It's not like an even quality of comedy throughout the whole thing, and of course that definitely depends on personal taste. For me, I found the first episode probably the funniest of the whole series, but of course that's not to say all the other episodes weren't funny. And some of them were still funny that I really enjoyed, but you know, it's definitely, they've got levels of it. So, you know, it's not one of those shows you can just go in expecting every single episode is gonna be a knockout, hysterical, slide-splitting episode. But, you know, I still encourage you to watch the whole thing, because every episode is still worth the watching, and definitely still enjoyable and fun and wholesome and just cute slice of life if you need to fill that slice of life void in these coming out months. The second anime I watched is Great Pretender. Oh my gosh, this anime is so great. I could go on the rave on this anime forever. But just a couple of quick pros. It's got a beautiful art style. It's got great characters, and the arcs, like it's got like a 3 or 4 episode arc structure, and every single one of them is narratively sound and also like emotionally impactful, and just wholesome, as they're, you know, they're like, you know, just up to their little capers and helping people and stuff and all that good stuff. It's really enjoyable and I had a great time watching it. Unfortunately, production for this anime has been paused because of COVID and COVID related reasons, so it stopped currently at episode 14. Thankfully though, that still gives you 3 full arcs. No arc got cut in half. They were able to like finish out that 3rd arc, so you can still watch the first 3 arcs to completion and feel very satisfied. But there should be 23 episodes left in the series, or like total in the series, so I'm expecting 2 to 3 more arcs to come out whenever they do finally go back into production. But I'm not, it's definitely a good anime to start and not feel worried about you're gonna be left on a cliffhanger. Some cons is that since this is kind of an international caper anime, sometimes the switching between languages is slightly annoying. Not annoying in the sense that they're switching, but annoying in the sense that they're not consistent. Like they will pick a language and they'll say a couple lines in that language so you know which language they're supposed to be talking in, and then they'll switch back to Japanese. I know practically it would be impossible to have like one voice actor be able to speak in all these different languages, but like there's a part of me that almost prefers that they would do that. For example, if one quest is being done in one particular country, then everyone speaks that country's language while they're there, and then it switches, which is like a practicality nightmare, but like the heart wants what the heart wants. For what it is though, they do a really good job of honoring the different cultures and the different languages within the arcs and giving them their moment of like acknowledgement and appreciation, which still, I mean, as far as my book is concerned, goes a long way. Another con was that the first arc for me felt very much like you're tossed in the deep end of this world, so there's a lot of like catch up and you can't really enjoy the revelation of the plot and everything because nothing really explicitly feels planned. It just kind of feels random like everything else in the show because you are tossed in the deep end. But the other arcs feel a lot more enjoyable because you're able to kind of call what's gonna happen or like understand when the plot comes into play, or just, it's hard to explain without having seen the show, but I definitely enjoyed the following arcs a lot more than the first one. Not to say that the first one wasn't enjoyable, it was just enjoyable in a different way. Of these two anime, my favorites of them for the month of July was definitely The Great Pretender. I really enjoyed the soundtrack for it and just everything about the show. It's so beautiful, literally and figuratively beautiful. So I really enjoyed that and I can't wait for the rest of the episodes to be released. The reason it won over Kakushi is because, you know, Kakushi, like I was saying, could be a little slow at sometimes, which is not a bad thing, but definitely I loved every single episode of Great Pretender up to this point, and I don't think I can say the same for Kakushi Goto. But you know, that might just be me. It's a comedy show, so you might love every single episode of them, where I was just like, oh, there are some that I like and some that just kind of fall flat for me personally. So definitely check it out yourself. The other anime content or whatever that I was engaged in this past month is I finally made a My Anime List account, which is definitely a game changer. Being able to have all those lists on there and be able to plan what anime I want to watch next, or what anime I've watched, or what anime I've dropped. It just helps me feel like I have a really good sense of, I don't know, how deep, I don't want to say how deeply entrenched in anime culture I am, but, you know, it's kind of that. I guess it's the same, very similar to like having my bookshelf so I can keep up with what I've read, and that's what I really like about it, where I can keep up with what I've watched and I can just kind of track everything. And I'm definitely like a tracker list kind of girl, so I really enjoy actually having an account instead of just lurking on it and scrolling through different stuff. Another fun thing I did in the month of July as far as anime is concerned is that my household had like a weave day is what we called it, and that'd be me, my brother, and my cousin. And what we did was we each picked 4 of our favorite, like all-time favorite openings to different anime, and then we all sat down in the living room when we watched them, so there was 12 in total, and then we picked the best sound, best visual, and best overall for the different openings, and just kind of like learn more about like each other's taste in anime, and just like really got to appreciate beautiful anime and beautiful songs that meant a lot to us growing up and also still now. My picks for that, in case you were wondering, is History Maker from Yuri on Ice, Stalemate from the anime called D-Fragments, Kein, I think is how it's said, from Dororo, and Fiction by Otaku Nikoi, the one where they did the cool little dance thing, just because I feel like that's definitely going to be legendary. I also had a lot of honorable mentions, such as like the My Soul Your Beats from Angel Beats, and the first Future Diary opening was also really good. Finally, last but not least, for the Camp Nano section of this video, I just wanted to talk about some of the writing I did over the July, some things I learned, and just, you know, where I want to go forward with my writing projects. I will definitely make an AuthorTube video at some point in time in the future, just to be like more in depth about like my writing on this channel. but I will just give some like cursory notices in this video so you can just hear it, I guess, if you want to, if you're curious. So I currently have 2 projects that I'm kind of actively working on. I have one called Project Fate, and I have one called Project Sacrifice. In Project Fate, during the Camp NaNoWriMo in July, I wrote 10,382 words. I did 10K, I'm so happy. Project Sacrifice is not yet in a drafting stage. It's still definitely incubating in my head, and I'm still working out the different acts and what's going to happen and the different characters. So that one's just more of like a thought project. But I was really satisfied with the word count I was able to get in Project Fate. I'm definitely trying to wrap that project up in, gosh, maybe the next year or so. I'm definitely a very slow writer. I know about AuthorTube from definitely Kate Kavanaugh, who's definitely one of the giants in that field, and I feel like she can write, she has written like 10,000 words in a day. It's took me like a month to write that many, but honestly, I'm very happy with that. I don't write a lot during the school year, which is something I'm going to try and change. So the fact that I was able to get back into writing and write that much in 1 month means a lot to me, and it's definitely like a personal benchmark of success. As far as things that I learned during July, I definitely really refined my writing system. I was able to kind of write it down and make it into a process that I can kind of follow consistently. I definitely think some elements of it will change in the future, but like having that very like physical system is, I find, very useful. And I also was able to better study chapter shape and how that works, and the pacing of chapters and how they should feel, and having them in different locations. That was definitely something I've learned, not having like back-to-back chapters all happen in the same place, but you know, shifting up like the very physical location of like, maybe we could do the scene in a different area, or does it have to be done here, or where's another location that could contrast really well with what's actually happening in the chapter. So all those were things that I knew, like head knowledge before, but now I've really started to internalize and try and actively work on in my writing, which was really fun to discover. But I think that's pretty much it. That's all my July in content form, I suppose. Definitely let me know what you think about any of the stuff that I read or watched, and definitely let me know like how your July went. Did you have fun with what you read? Did you enjoy it? Did you learn anything about like how you write? I want to learn all of it. But I think that's about it. So thank you for spending the past couple minutes with me, and I will see you guys next time.